Says we're live. Let's see here. I'm going to do something with my clock. There we go. Okay. Oh, let's see. That thing didn't. All right, that's good. Hi there, and welcome to this day in history for It's not January anymore. February. Hi there, and welcome to this day in history for February 2nd. February 2nd is the 33rd day of the year in the Gregorian calendar, with 332 days remaining to the end of the year and 333 in leap years. Today's word is promulgate. Promulgate, Promulgate, promulgate. Promulgate is a verb that means to make something like a law, an idea, or a belief known to the public, usually by open declaration, to popularize or advocate, to put a law or a rule, for example, into effect by a formal public announcement, to make known by open declaration, such as laws, decrees, tidings, publish, announce, proclaim, promulgate. I'd like to take a moment to mention that links to my research are included in the show notes. Ask you to go ahead and click that like button. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share this video with others. You could do that with the link in your email messaging or social media. Also, there is a link in the show notes to my This Day in History playlist, and I'll put a link up in the iCards after the live when we go to replay. All righty. And with that, we're going to start with an item from February the 2nd in the year 506, when Alaric II, the 8th king of the Visigoths, promulgated the Breviary of Alaric. So we just talked about what promulgated means, and that is an interesting name, the Breviary of Alaric. What in the world does that mean? Well, looks like we get a bonus word today. The word breviary comes to us from Latin, and it means a brief summary. A brief summary. I guess in a way, these episodes of This Day in History are a breviary of sorts, aren't they? A brief summary of things that happened on this day in history. And while I do write these things down and have them collected, they're not exactly in book form as breviaries are often thought to be. These days, a breviary is usually more considered to be like a book of prayers, hymns, psalms, readings. Daily devotional might be a sort of breviary. But the original meaning of breviary is a brief summary. In the context of this item for February 2nd, 506, the Breviary of Alaric is a brief summary of Roman law that Alaric II wanted regular people under Visigoth rule to follow. And I saw this map of the Visigoth realm. This is where Spain currently is, and then up here you've got what is currently France. And so the Visigoths had all this area back 1,500 years ago. And from my understanding, they were not people you wanted to mess with. Anyway, let's see here. Alaric II wanted regular people under Visigoth rule to follow these Roman laws, and the Visigoth nobles had their own rules and laws already, but the ordinary citizens under Visigoth rules needed some rules and laws, and they needed to know about these rules and laws. You can't follow the rules if you don't know them. And so Alaric assembled this breviary. And so it was like, okay, here's the rules now. We've got rules now, and here's what they are. Alaric II compiled this collection of laws, the Breviary of Alaric, and promulgated it on February 2nd, 506. That's a lot of blah, 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 isn't it? If you happen to be a fan of the musical group They Might Be Giants, you might already know that New York City was originally called New Amsterdam. Did you know that? On February 2nd, in the year 1652, New Amsterdam was incorporated, and then, of course, later on renamed New York. Amsterdam indicates the Dutch influence, and in the architecture of some of the older buildings, you could see some of that Dutch influence. And then, of course, later on, the British came and took over, and so some of the place names got more British names, Amsterdam being Dutch and York being British. Alexander Selkirk was a Scottish sailor in the late 1600s and early 1700s. He served both in the British Royal Navy and also as what was called a privateer or free sailor. And while on one of his expeditions as a privateer, the ship he was with stopped to resupply on a small uninhabited island in the South Pacific Ocean. You know, the Pacific Ocean is huge. But in the South Pacific Ocean, they came upon an island and they stopped there. I'm not sure exactly what or how they were going to resupply because it's uninhabited. It's not like they had a 7-Eleven there where you could pop in and get a coffee or anything. But they stopped there to resupply, and Selkirk had determined that he felt that the ship was not seaworthy. And I guess he was right. But anyway, he asked to be left on the island there. And the captain agreed, left him there and went off. And sure enough, the ship sunk somewhere. But our story today is about Selkirk. And so there he was on that little island all by himself out in the Pacific Ocean, way out in, I mean, really the middle of nowhere. But he survived. There were animals that he could hunt and plants that he could use to his benefit, and he hunted and made do with what was available to him there. And so it was that on February 2nd, 1709, when another English privateer ship found and rescued Alexander Selkirk, he had been there marooned on that little island all by himself for 4 years and 4 months. When he got back to England, his story of survival made the news and was widely publicized and became the inspiration for Daniel Defoe's fictional character, Robinson Crusoe. So, this is the birthday of Solomon R. Guggenheim, born February 2nd, 1861. He was born into a wealthy mining family. I mean, mining like metals and stuff. And he participated in the family business as well as other business ventures. He did pretty well financially and started collecting art when he was in his 30s. He established a foundation, the Solomon R. Guggenheim Foundation, and also the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum in New York City, and lived to the age of 88. Oh my goodness, it's Groundhog Day. On February 2nd, 1877, in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, I'm going to get my P places straight, Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, the first Groundhog Day was observed. This comes from a Pennsylvania Dutch superstition that if a groundhog comes out of his den and sees his shadow, he goes back under, he gets scared of his shadow. What a crybaby. Scared of his shadow, goes back underground, and we have 6 more weeks of winter. But if it's cloudy and he does not see his shadow, then we get an early spring. And I have to tell you, I always wondered about this. Even as a little girl, I thought, well, It sounds exactly backwards to me. It would seem to me that if he came out and saw the sun shining, shadow or not, well, it was spring, time to get out and do stuff, But if it was dark outside, he might ought to think about going back in for a nap, get up later. But so I don't know how they came about on that notion that if he sees his shadow, he goes back in, and we have 6 weeks of winter. And if he doesn't see his shadow, then we get an earlier spring. And so that was always confusing to me. Later on, when they might. I remember seeing where the camera would go to Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, and watch the thing live on the Today Show. And they would do this early in the morning when it was actually still dark outside. So who could see their shadow then anyway? It always seemed a little arbitrary to me. And for one thing, confusing, arbitrary, and how do they even know what exactly the groundhog saw? These are the kinds of things that I wondered about growing up, honestly. It seems really like a little more reason to have a party than any kind of an accurate weather forecasting tool. They do have a big time with it, though, don't they? What do you think? And oh no, did I miss the death of Queen Victoria? She passed away on January 22nd. I don't remember talking about that then. Queen Victoria passed away on January 22nd, 1901, at the age of 81, and her funeral was held on February the 2nd, 1901. She reigned for 64 years, from 1837 to 1901, Queen Victoria. The Grand Central Terminal opened in New York City on February 2nd, 1913, and that is quite a place. Hopefully you can see that. That place is huge. These are people in here to give you some idea of the scale and magnitude of how big Grand Central Terminal is. I've been there, and somewhere in my life there may be a picture that I've taken or a picture of me there. That place is huge. Quite something. Grand Central Terminal. All righty. Now, have you ever heard of the Iditarod race? It's a dog sled race. It takes place in Alaska. And I actually met someone one time who ran the Iditarod. Surprised me, but why would somebody make that up? They typically do this race in March when it's still terribly cold, blizzardy winter in Alaska. We're talking about the kind of cold most of us have never experienced. It looks like this race is probably on for 2021, best I could tell, and I certainly wish them the best. But the Iditarod race was inspired by an event that took place in early February of 1925. It is that up in Nome, Alaska, which is way on up there in Alaska, that had some cases of diphtheria in January of that year, and some deaths from it. And the one and only doctor in Nome was getting pretty worried. He was seeing more and more cases, and he was worried that they were fixing to have a total outbreak there, and worried that nobody might be left when it was all done. He somehow got a message out, maybe by telegram, somehow got a message out to explain their situation and to ask for diphtheria serum, which was the treatment of the day. But travel across Alaska at this time of year is really dicey because the cold is so extreme and whiteout blizzard conditions, nearly impossible to travel in. All concerned considered their options. The unrelenting bitter cold would stop most engines. I don't even think you could fly in that. The one thing that they were pretty sure that they could successfully make the trip was dog sleds. So they got some mushers together. That's what they call the people who run the dog sleds, and relayed that diphtheria serum across the Alaskan wilderness in the worst of winter conditions, and got it to Nome in about 5.5 days. Quite something. 20 mushers, about 150 dogs, and they went 674 miles, or over 1,000 kilometers. Delivered the goods and saved the town of Nome and the surrounding communities. Now, being in 1925, radio was the popular new medium of the day, and the event was also closely followed in newspapers. And that event was the inspiration for the Iditarod race. Long may they run. And I think that's going to do it for us today. I hope you learned something you didn't know before. As always, links to my research are included in the show notes. I'll put that link in the corner also, and a link to last year's This Day in History episode up there in the iCards as well. Now let's see what else. I already talked about the playlist. And when this video is done, I will also send a link over to my blog. No, really. That's what it's called. No, really. There's a link to that in the show notes also. And let's see here. Thanks for watching. Give it a like. Consider subscribing. Alrighty, I think I've hit everything that I need to hit here. Clicked off all the bullet points. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. And we find the thank you very much button. And thank you very much.